From January 1975 through May 31st, 2009, there have been a total of 213,814 crossing accidents, which were reported by the railroads to the National Response Center. Closer examination reveals that over 20,000 people were killed in these accidents, and another 79,469 people were injured. Shocking statistics were recently reported by the Federal Railroad Administration regarding railroad-related accidents and injuries. It is estimated that cars and trains collide every 12 minutes, with a total of 9,570 train incidents and accidents in the year 2009. Here are some disturbing statistics. Of the 9,570 train wrecks, 649 people were killed and 6,686 people were injured. The average train weighs 12 million pounds, so the weight ratio of a train to a car is about 4,000 to 1. This compares to the weight ratio of a car to an aluminum can. A train traveling at 50 miles per hour, pulling 100 cars, takes 1 mile to stop. So in a contest between a car and a train, the train obviously and always wins. The motorist in a train motor vehicle collision is 40 times more likely to die than in a collision between two motor vehicles. This fact is a real shocker. As of December 2009, the United States had 136,041 public at-grade railroad crossings. Of these crossings, approximately 42,301 have gates, 22,039 have flashing lights, and 1,196 have highway traffic signals, wigwags, and bells. So do the math. The remaining railroad crossings, approximately 72,000 in America today, over 50% have nothing. No warning lights, no gates, and nothing to protect drivers. Plus, to make matters even worse, not only are these 72,000 crossings unprotected, many of them are overgrown with weeds, trees, and types of vegetation, making the crossings very dangerous, like you cannot see the train a-coming. About 9:30 a.m. on January 19th, 1998, Chris Barber, a trash collector in the city of Goodwin, Arkansas, and his co-worker, Charles Rolfe, were working their route when Charles turned the trash truck off of Highway 70 and approached railroad tracks running parallel to the highway. Charles slowed and looked both ways down the track, seeing and hearing no trains. He dropped the truck into low gear in order to climb the 53-inch inclined approach to the crossing. As the two came upon the tracks, Chris, sitting in the passenger seat, was finally able to see far enough down the track to observe a train was coming right at them at 60 miles per hour. But it was too late. The truck could not clear the track before the arrival of the train. Chris Rolfe was killed instantly, and Chris Barber was permanently disabled. Today, the Insider Exclusive goes behind the headlines in a new TV exclusive, Death on the Tracks, Union Pacific Railroad's $37 million cover-up, to show how Robert Pottroff, partner at the Pottroff Law Office, successfully uncovered, as the court wrote, a pervasive and sinister corporate policy at Union Pacific that put company profits before public safety, and how Union Pacific intentionally destroyed track records and voice tapes and all kinds of evidence. But Bob expected this from Union Pacific, so instead of worrying about all the missing evidence, he embraced it and used missing evidence as one of the themes of the case. The challenge was how to impress on the jury all the items of evidence that were missing. The solution was to have 12 empty big boxes representing all the missing evidence with labels for all the evidence that should have been preserved. 12 big empty boxes sitting in the courtroom staring right at the jury. With a backdrop of missing evidence, it was easier to expose the industry's dirty little secrets about safety issues that the railroad industry have refused to acknowledge. The jury was so infuriated and so disgusted with Union Pacific's conduct and flagrant disregard for the safety of all Americans and even the laws of our great country, they rendered a verdict of $5 million against Union Pacific Railroad for actual damages and a record-breaking $25 million punitive damages award for their flagrant disregard of the law to protect all Americans. After exhausting all their appeal options, including a petition to the United States Supreme Court, Union Pacific was finally forced to pay just over $37 million to satisfy this judgment. In its petition to the United States Supreme Court, the railroad challenged the size of the punitive damage award by pointing out that it was by far the largest punitive damages award ever upheld by an American court in a railroad grade crossing case. In fact, following this verdict, Arkansas's railroads began to aggressively clear visibility obstructions at their crossings and paying for maintenance that had been deferred. The result was a tremendous reduction of accidents and fatalities at crossings in Arkansas over the next several years. Bob Pottroff has earned the highest respect from citizens and lawyers alike as one of the best train accident lawyers in the nation, fighting for the victims of railroad companies in the battle for railroad safety. And because of that, he is driven to fight for people who have been harmed by the willful or negligent actions of others. His goals, not only to get justice for his clients, but to make sure that all railroad companies implement maximum safety protections that all Americans need and deserve. I'm Steve Murphy, and this is the Insider Exclusive, live from Minneapolis, Minnesota, with the Pottroff Law Offices. It is my great privilege to introduce Bob Pottroff and Steve Boyda to the show. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you.
Today we're going to be talking about another railroad case which your firm specializes in. It's Barber versus Union Pacific. Okay. But before we get into it, tell our audience a little bit about your firm and the type of practice you mainly specialize in.
It's kind of funny that I'm in Manhattan, Kansas, where I've never had a railroad case in Riley County, Kansas, where I practice. But my practice is almost exclusively railroad law throughout the United States. We represent members of the public who've been affected by railroads and the interplay of public railroad.
Right. And generally, there are these cases because the railroad's initial position when there's an accident, and there's lots of them, it is the driver's fault. You know, and the public perception, and this is one of the challenges that you have in all these cases, is how could you not hear this big locomotive? How could you not see it? It's got to be your fault, right?
Anytime a member of the public's injured in a railroad accident, you can assure yourself that the first reaction of the railroad public relations machine will be to blame the public.
Yeah. Now, Steve, you could practice any kind of law. You could represent major Fortune 500 companies, yet you choose to represent the little guy. Why is that?
Well, I grew up in a rural area, practiced law in a little Marysville, Kansas, all those years, and became very connected with people. Mm-hmm. So I'm a people person, and individuals need representation, and that means you need to seek truth, and I relate to that.
We're going to discuss a case today, which is the client is Chris Barber and versus Union Pacific. Tell us a little bit about the facts of the case. What happened?
Chris was working. He was working on a dump truck, a trash hauler. The driver of the truck was following the route. Chris was actually doing the manual labor as they were turning off a highway to go over to one of the residences. They encountered a typical Arkansas crossing, that is a huge hump that the truck had to go up over, rough crossing surface on top, vegetation that was blocking the view both directions, and as the decision was made to get across that crossing, it appeared to be an open view. Unfortunately, a truck in that kind of an environment doesn't just zoom over the crossing. It has to go to low gear, and it takes about 15 seconds to get across. During that 15 seconds, a train comes into view. It's barreling down on the truck. The driver does everything he can to get across, and just the tail end of the dump truck gets hit by the train, and it's catastrophic. It kills the driver and leaves Chris within just inches of his life being taken too.
Now, this is a kind of a typical case, isn't it? But
Unfortunately, it's way too common.
What did you discover in your search for the truth with this case?
The first thing we discovered is how true it is that the railroad is in total control of the evidence.
Mm-hmm.
They own the train, they own the tracks, they own the crossing surface, they own all of the data from the event recorders on the train, they own the documentation systems that are supposed to provide us with information as to whether or not they're safely operating their trains. And they also train our law enforcement on how they investigate accidents.
They show them exactly the procedures that they want followed, so the outcome is what they want.
Preordained.
Yeah.
The law enforcement is actively trained by railroad personnel that these accidents are always going to be the fault of the public.
Now, in this particular case, there was a lot of missing evidence, but what I enjoyed reading the most about the case was you knew that going in, and you used that as a positive strategy, right, to pursue this case. So explain to our audience what I mean by that.
Well, what we'd found in other cases is it's almost expected that the key pieces of evidence, prior complaints about the crossing, records that would show the defects in the crossing, the information about whether or not the horn was sounded correctly, information about whether or not lights and gates would have appropriately been installed at this crossing, is all missing. And we knew we were going to run into that in this case. The voice tapes of the crew reporting the accident. What did they tell the railroad moments after this accident? All of those things gone. And rather than getting into a situation where we felt like the missing evidence was going to hurt us, we made a conscious decision to simply document items that should be evidence, make sure that we did everything possible that we could do to preserve that evidence, and allow the blame to fall where it would on the railroad for intentionally concealing or destroying the evidence.
Right.
And then when it comes to trial, the sense of justice in a jury is very strong. And as we started bringing out one piece at a time of evidence that was missing, you could just see it in the jury's eyes that this isn't fair.
Yeah.
This isn't where my children are going to be raised. This isn't how you're going to behave in my county.
Right, and what was remarkable, the way you displayed that in the courtroom by bringing out empty boxes, didn't you?
We had long discussions on how do you prove a negative?
Yeah.
How do you?
I mean, this is great.
How do you prove that there's a piece of evidence here that would help my case?
Yeah.
If only it were here.
Yeah.
When it's not tangible.
And you did that how?
So we labeled clear, empty plastic boxes with the name of the document or the evidence that was missing.
Yeah.
And just stacked them up. And as the boxes stacked up higher and higher, it became obvious that this case was, the railroad knew what the case was about because they had systematically gone through and allowed each and every piece of evidence to fall to the wayside.
Now, did they object to this very good, dramatic way of presenting it?
Vigorously. They objected from the time we started bringing out boxes all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court.
What was their objection?
That it was inflammatory.
Oh.
And
well, you can't tell the truth.
and my position was always, well, I won't do it if you'll just bring me the evidence.
And the judge saw that as right.
The judge saw that obviously if the evidence was inflammatory, why shouldn't be the presentation of the lack of evidence also be inflammatory?
And the key part of that is we could help fill the boxes because there was an extensive investigation, found a witness who watched as you stood there and the horn was not blown properly, found railroad officials themselves that had reported this crossing as dangerous, a mayor, the garbage company, any number of folks that complained bitterly about this crossing, so that box should have been full.
Yeah. Now, we learned that the railroad, the company, actually intimidated some witnesses, didn't they?
Oh, absolutely.
How would they do that?
Well, railroad employees know that there's a code of silence.
Yeah.
In fact, there's a rule in their rule book that says your behavior should be such that it does not make the railroad be seen in a bad light. There's specific rules that say in an investigation like this, you don't discuss the facts of the case with anybody other than railroad officials or, if pushed, law enforcement.
Yeah.
And what happens is this code of silence falls in place, and witnesses either forget or do everything in their power to make sure that they don't have you asking them the critical questions that they would have to answer under oath truthfully, or protect the railroad and lie, which
Yeah.
is a dilemma that is tremendous for an employee
Yeah.
who depends on that job.
They even have a claims manual, which basically says what?
The claims manual, unfortunate, but it's very real. It's in black and white. Suggests that when there's a case that their fault is obvious, they shouldn't spend a lot of time documenting the bad evidence. And the goal there is to make sure that the evidence isn't available for the claim to be settled. Instead, they want you to settle those cases quickly.
Yeah.
The tragedy with that is some of those may be minor accidents or non-injury accidents, and they're learning experiences that are missed by the railroad,
Yeah.
where they could actually learn from a near miss, learn from a minor accident, and prevent a tragedy if they just corrected the problem that created the first accident.
Now, you got a very substantial verdict, $5 million, but this case goes on. It was appealed, and you also got a punitive damage award, a humongous award of $25 million.
The brief that the railroad wrote to the U.S. Supreme Court trying to get the Supreme Court to take review included its assertion that this is the largest punitive damage award to ever be upheld by an American court against a railroad in a crossing case.
As if that was a good defense to overturn it.
And
I mean, that's amazing.
I thanked them for the compliment. I hope their fact checking was true, but
Yeah.
if that's correct, it is a huge award, and it made a difference.
Yeah.
It did affect their bottom line, and it did make them change the way they're doing business.
Actually, the final judgment was $37 million.
Correct.
Because of the interest that it accrued over the period of time in their appeals process. Now, as a result of this case, there has been some improvements, hasn't there, in the way railroads aggressively clear some of the crossings, right?
Yeah, we've...
It hurt. $37 million hurt.
Arkansas became a battleground in about 1999 for us. The Barber case being really the linchpin case that finally, when this verdict came in at a total of $30 million, their attention was gotten. What we found is before we started this aggressive litigation practice in Arkansas, railroads were having about 110 accidents a year in the state. Now, if you then follow up after '99 when the battle started, over the next 4 or 5 years, that number dropped to 70 accidents a year. And if you follow to even after the judgment was paid and the improvements that have happened in vegetation and capital improvements and in installation of lights and gates, they're now in the 40s. So if you compare the before and after, we're talking about more than half of the accidents have gone away.
In fact, Arkansas was known as the most dangerous place in the nation on a per capita basis for your safety.
Wow.
You are more likely to have an accident where a train hit you in Arkansas before '99 than any other state in the Union.
But not anymore.
Not after the cleanup that followed the Barber case.
There are, unfortunately, people going to have more train accidents. What do you recommend to them? They need a lawyer, don't they?
The reality is, anytime there's an accident at a grade crossing, there's an evaluation process. Sometimes people make mistakes. Sometimes people make bad decisions. But sometimes bad crossings kill good drivers. And if you're that close to the problem, you really need an expert, a lawyer, someone that's familiar with these issues to help you through that evaluation process.
And do not believe at face value the railroad's investigation or law enforcement that's been trained by the railroad, right? That their evaluation or their opinion of what happened to the accident, correct? Because it could be a lie.
That report is going to read virtually the same in every crossing accident in the United States. It's going to say something like, we're the railroad, we were doing everything right, the public got in front of our train, we hit them, it's their fault. And that's been, in essence, 99% of the reports in crossing accidents in this country, because the railroads are teaching law enforcement how to do the investigations.
Well, you're on a mission, and you're helping the small guy, and I want to thank you very much for being on the program, because this case is an amazing case. Thank you for joining us today. Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.